The camera caught everything. That is the part that made this different from the disputes and confrontations and gray area moments that baseball produces regularly and absorbs quietly into the background noise of a long season. Those moments exist in the space between what happened and what can be proven, the territory where everyone has an opinion and no one has definitive evidence, and the argument continues until something more interesting comes along to replace it. This was not that kind of moment. The camera was there. The angle was clean. The footage was unambiguous in the specific, devastating way that unambiguous footage always is, not because it told a complicated story, but because it told a simple one. Completely. Without gaps. Without the room for alternative interpretation that athletes and their representatives depend on when the conversation moves from the field to the league office. Bryce Harper did something to Shohei Ohtani. The camera recorded it. The umpire saw it in real time. And before the stadium had fully processed what it was watching, the thumb was out and Harper was gone. Ejected. Immediately. Without the discussion, without the lengthy argument, without the back and forth that typically precedes a decision of that magnitude in a game of that importance. The umpire didn't need a conversation. The footage didn't need an explanation. And the baseball world, watching it unfold in real time and then again and again on replay, didn't need anyone to tell them what they had just seen. They had seen it. Clearly. And the reaction that followed was the kind that only emerges when something happens in public that was never supposed to happen at all. Bryce Harper is not a simple figure in this sport. He never has been. He arrived in professional baseball as the kind of prospect that the sport produces once in a very long time. The player whose ability is so visible, so undeniable from such an early age, that the weight of expectation attached to him before he threw a single professional pitch was the kind that collapses most people under it. Harper didn't collapse. He grew into something that fulfilled enough of what was promised to make him, without serious argument, one of the most talented players of his generation. But talent and temperament are two different things. And Harper's temperament, the fire that makes him genuinely great in the moments when great is what the situation requires, has always carried with it a secondary quality that the sport has spent years navigating around. The edge that doesn't always know where to stop. The competitive instinct that, in certain moments, under certain pressures, pushes past the line that separates intensity from something the rulebook addresses specifically. He has been in these situations before. Not like this, not with footage this clear and a consequence this immediate. But the history exists. The pattern, laid out over a career long enough to contain multiple chapters, tells a story about a player who has always lived close to the boundary between what the game allows and what it doesn't. In the sixth inning of a game that already mattered more than a regular season game has any right to matter, Harper crossed that boundary. In front of every camera in the building. In front of an umpire who had a direct line of sight. In front of Shohei Ohtani, who processed what was happening with the specific, composed stillness that has become one of the most recognizable things about him. The umpire's arm went up before the noise in the stadium had finished forming. The sequence that led to that moment had been building across innings in the way that genuine conflicts between real competitors always build, not through dramatic confrontation but through the quiet, cumulative pressure of two elite players sharing a field in a game where every at-bat carries consequences. Ohtani had been Ohtani. That is sometimes the simplest and most complete way to describe what he does in games like this. He is himself, fully, without adjustment or concession to the difficulty of the situation, and that consistency is precisely what makes him so difficult to face and so impossible to rattle. He had been productive at the plate. He had been present in every moment in the way that the best players are present, not loudly, not theatrically, but in the way that shows up in the places the score reflects. Harper had been watching all of it. Harper watches everything. That is part of what makes him great, the attention he pays to opposing players, the way he catalogs what he sees and uses it to inform his own approach, the competitive intelligence that operates underneath the visible confidence. He had been watching Ohtani the way a man watches something that he both respects and resents, in the specific combination that elite competition sometimes produces between players who understand each other's quality too well to pretend it doesn't exist. Whatever accumulated in Harper across those innings, whatever combination of competitive frustration and the particular pressure of facing a player who doesn't appear to feel pressure the way other players do, came out in the sixth inning in a way that could not be taken back. He made a choice. The camera recorded it. And the umpire, positioned exactly where umpires are positioned for exactly the reason that moments like this exist, reacted with a speed that indicated he had seen it clearly enough not to need a second look. The ejection itself lasted approximately 4 seconds. That brevity was its own statement. Baseball ejections, in the ordinary course of things, involve a process, a confrontation, an argument, the manager emerging from the dugout, words exchanged at volume while the stadium watches and the game pauses in that particular suspended way it has when something significant is being negotiated in plain sight. None of that happened here. There was no argument phase. There was no window during which Harper might have said something that changed the trajectory of what the umpire had already decided. The thumb came out with the certainty of a man who had already completed his evaluation before he made the gesture, a man who had seen what he needed to see and was communicating a conclusion rather than opening a discussion. Harper's reaction in the seconds after the ejection told its own story. Not guilt, exactly. Harper has enough competitive pride to resist anything that looks like admission. But a quality in his body language that was different from the righteous indignation that accompanies ejections a player believes are unjust. He knew what he had done. The footage knew what he had done. And somewhere in the gap between those two things, the argument that might have emerged in a different situation simply didn't materialize. He walked. Not stormed, walked. With the specific, measured pace of a man who understands that the moment for escalation has already passed and that what happens next will be determined not on the field but in offices and hearing rooms and the league's formal process. The Phillies' dugout was very quiet as he came through it. Ohtani stood where he had been standing when it happened and did the thing that Ohtani does in moments specifically designed to produce a different response. Nothing. Not nothing in the passive sense, not the absence of reaction because the reaction hadn't arrived yet. Nothing in the active sense. The deliberate, chosen stillness of a man who had experienced what just happened and had made an immediate, internal decision about how to respond to it. His expression didn't change. His posture didn't shift. He looked at the umpire completing the ejection gesture and then he looked back toward the field with the orientation of a player whose next task was already in his mind before the current situation had fully resolved. The Dodgers around him were not as still. The bench had moved in the collective, instinctive way that benches move when something happens to a teammate that shouldn't have happened, the surge toward the edge of the dugout, the voices rising, the physical expression of a group of people who shared a reaction even before they fully processed what they were reacting to. But Ohtani was still. And that stillness, that refusal to give the moment more than it deserved from his side of it, was the thing that cameras kept returning to in the replays. Not the foul play. Not the ejection. Not Harper walking through the dugout door. Ohtani standing exactly as he had been standing before, as if what had just happened was something he had already filed in the correct place internally and moved past. Dave Roberts came to the microphone after the game with the expression of a man who had spent several hours deciding exactly how much of what he actually thought should be said out loud in a room full of recorders. He had watched the footage. Multiple times. From multiple angles. With the specific, thorough attention of someone who understood that what he said about it would be quoted, replayed, and used as a data point in whatever formal process followed. He said the footage spoke for itself. That phrase, in post-game press conference language, carries a precise meaning. It is the way a manager says that what happened was clearly wrong without using words that create complications in league proceedings. The footage speaks for itself. Which means, I have seen it, you have seen it, everyone has seen it, and I am choosing to let that shared visual reality do the work that my words would otherwise need to do. He said the league would respond. He said it with confidence rather than hope, the confidence of a man who had seen the footage and understood that the footage made the response essentially automatic. And then a reporter asked him about Ohtani. About how Ohtani had reacted. About what it said about him that in the immediate aftermath of something directed at him deliberately, he had stood there exactly as he had been standing before. Roberts paused. Not the short pause of a man buying time, but the longer pause of a man who has something genuine to say and is deciding how to say it correctly. He said that it didn't surprise him. That the people who have been around Ohtani long enough have stopped being surprised by that quality, the composure in moments designed to break composure. He said that it was one of the things that made Ohtani who Ohtani was. Not just the bat speed or the pitch movement or the ERA or the statistics that required new categories to contain them properly. The stillness. Under pressure. When the situation was specifically constructed to produce its opposite. That, Robert said quietly, was as impressive as anything else. The league opened its investigation before midnight. The footage had been reviewed. The umpire's report had been filed. The formal machinery of consequence, slower than the ejection, more deliberate than the immediate reaction of a stadium full of people watching something happen in real time, had begun its process with the specific, unhurried certainty of an institution that already knew where it was going. Harper would face a suspension. The length was to be determined, calibrated against the footage, against the history, against the precedents that the league had established in previous situations and needed to remain consistent with now that this one had joined the record. The Phillies would navigate it. Organizations always do. The roster adjusts, the lineup shifts, the machine continues operating because professional baseball is built to absorb the absence of any single player, even the ones that feel irreplaceable in the moment they disappear from the lineup card. And Ohtani would play tonight. And tomorrow night. And the night after that. With the same stillness. The same refusal to carry what happened in the 6th inning into the 7th, or the 8th, or the next series, or the one after that. The camera had caught everything that Bryce Harper did. It had also caught everything that Ohtani didn't do. And that footage, the stillness, the composure, the active choice to be exactly himself in a moment designed to make him something else, was the part that would last longer than the ejection, longer than the investigation, longer than whatever suspension number the league eventually attached to a decision that everyone had already made before the formal process concluded. The camera